Right, hello, greetings. Salam, shalom, peace, pax, mir. It's Tom Daffern speaking. It's my weekly Fasting Sunday broadcast about philosophy, the state of the world. This week I'm alone. My friend Isabella Usher has gone back to the camp in Calais and then on to the UK. So thanks for coming, Isabel. And if other workaway volunteers want to come and can make it through the pandemic craziness, then you can go on the website and request a staycation here. It's interesting. And okay, so I've got various things I want to say this week. It's the 25th of April. And it's been quite a week, as ever, in the world's developments, and I've got some very exciting things to share. So I hope you're, well wherever you are, and surviving the global madness that's going on, and the kind of narratives that we're forced to swallow. I think the most difficult thing I've found in this, ever since. Well, it was brought home to me immediately after the Brexit referendum, when the BBC forced an analysis of that result against right reason by a Prime Minister, Theresa May, that I'd met and thought was reasonably intelligent and moral. And I realised with horror that the entire apparatus of the Tory party and the BBC and the British intelligence state were colluding in a lie. Brexit was not the will of the British people, and yet they trumpeted this at every possible opportunity. Why? What on earth was going on? So I asked in all innocence to the Director General of the BBC, who's a descendant of Clementi, the great Italian composer, who made that decision? Who in the BBC apparatus has the power to make policy decisions that are so against right reason, so against the interests of Scotland, the interests of Northern Ireland? Who had that authority? And I was told you don't have the right to that information. So somebody made that decision. But we, the people, are denied access to it. So I realised at that point with a sinking feeling, we're not living in an information democracy at all. We're living in a totalitarian information imposition in which truth is now distorted into lies. And that's been getting worse and worse ever since that fatal vote in 2016. The Scottish people, as I know, have had enough. I mean, they can see this. I was living in Scotland at the time, and that's why I was so shocked. And the people of Northern Ireland, can see the chaos that this has caused. And most right-thinking people in England and Wales, likewise. And yet, 5 years on, we've been told this lie again and again and again. So it's a nightmare situation, but what I'm interested as a philosopher is the way that falsity can be constructed and then superimposed as truth. I've realised with horror how fragile truth is in our society. I mean, I'd already kind of known that philosophically. I mean, you read in history books about fascists and Nazis seizing power, or Stalin's state control of opinion. Anyone outside of the narrow band of what was Stalin's interpretation of Marxism was killed, and the same in Nazi Germany, and also in Imperial Japan. There was a Ministry of Thought Control that watched every single teacher. And I realised with horror in my teaching career in the UK that we've almost got there, because in the UK, teaching is now so tightly controlled by government officials that genuine, authentic, liberational teaching is essentially taken off the curriculum, because the curriculum is so tightly controlled by the centre in the form of a national curriculum. Now, I think that's wrong. I think we should have an international curriculum. I think teachers should be empowered to teach. Academics should be empowered to teach, freely. The whole idea of academic freedom is so precious. It's what Socrates died for. It's what Christ died for in his own way. And it's what countless martyrs have died for over the centuries. And yet, it's being taken from us. So I want to share something very interesting that I did this week, and which you may not know about, and it was very insightful. I occasionally tune into an academic centre at Harvard called the Belfer Centre, run by a very interesting academic called Paul Colby, and they run a very interesting sort of academic research centre into the history of intelligence, mostly in America, but obviously they're interested in intelligence worldwide. And they have links to an International Spy Museum, which is in Washington, D.C., I believe. And they put together a brilliant panel. It was a half-day conference, which probably you didn't attend, so I'm going to summarise what was said. And it culminated in John Kerry giving an address. But there were some very top-level people. There was a Vice Admiral, there were ex-top CIA analysts, there was a British Brigadier General. I'll share all of what they said in a minute. And it was introduced by Erin Sikorsky, who was one of the organisers, who runs a Centre for Climate and Security. Now, the whole theme of this conference, which I, as rector of the Green University, was very interested in, is the fact that actually, traditional spying and espionage from the old Cold War days and before was our country spies on country X, and we try and best each other at this game, and we try and find out your secrets, you try and find out ours, and it's a sort of, it's a Cold War game. And we're all in adversarial relationships, and sometimes people get killed, we've all seen the James Bond movies. What they were saying, and what was so refreshing and important about this conference, is these were top-level people saying that old style of doing espionage has to go. We're now facing an entirely new situation on the planet. We're facing climate change on a massive scale. There was information shared about the polar vortex is now under threat. The polar vortex apparently is the thing that keeps the very cold air up in the Arctic. And I presume there's one in the south, Antarctic as well. But the Arctic is warming at 3 times the rate of the rest of the planet, and they didn't go into the reasons, but they just said, this is the fact, and science has got reasons. Which means the permafrost is melting, the glaciers are melting, breaking off, and the entire Arctic could be ice-free within a decade or two. Now, the implications on the rest of the world are pretty vast. One of the fluke implications is that because the boundary between the polar air and the rest of the atmosphere is now more friable, it's more permeable because that boundary is breaking down, very cold air often can now come down south, and conversely very hot air can now go up north. So that in turn speeds up the deterioration of the polar vortex and further increases the warming of the Arctic. And that explains, it was explained to us on the Zoom call, that's why we had this freak cold weather in Texas a little while ago. You probably remember, freak. I mean, Texas is normally pretty hot, even in the winter, and yet suddenly all the pipes are frozen, people were, had no energy, it was a real crisis for them. And here in Europe, in France, we've just had a similar thing for a week or two. We had extremely cold air, and suddenly April vanished. It destroyed the vine crops of lots of vineyards in France. They were reduced to lighting candles around their vines, That was polar air coming down. And these events are going to get more frequent. Well, that's worrying, right? And the sea rise that can be expected from this melting of the Arctic is significant. There's 2.5 meters global sea level rise for every degree of increase in temperature. That's what scientists have worked out is probable. You can work out sums. Anyway, so the military at the planet and the intelligence community have begun to move on this. They've realised this is actually a greater threat to humanity than the officials let us know, the papers, than the news media and so on. And they've set up an international military council for environment and security. they've set up national projects like the Centre for Climate Security. And these were top-level people talking about what they're trying to do as former or current, intelligence operatives or researchers or academics. I mean, there's a sort of revolving door between top levels of academia who study intelligence and actual operatives, and we heard from both. Nothing was said that was classified, and so I can share this freely, and I'm not an intelligence operative, I'm simply an academic, but I'm very interested in, and I've always known the importance of intelligence for modern warfare and therefore for peacefare. As a peace studies scholar, I know that if we're going to get peace on this planet, the intelligence agencies are going to have to play their part. And therefore it was really heartening, actually, to see them doing so. We heard also from a woman called Sherry Goodman, who is involved also with the International Military Council on Climate and Security, from a Dr. John Holdren, who's a professor at Harvard in international relations, who spoke extremely well about this. And we then heard from a Vice Admiral, Dennis McGinn, who'd been a naval commander in the US in charge of their Third Fleet. And he was extremely eloquent about, he's done his homework. These guys have done their homework. One of their concerns is, what will be the impact of global warming on America's security? It will be major. The naval bases around America, the Air Force and Army bases, are they going to be swamped? Are they going to be inundated? What if there's an emergency call out, and America has to defend itself? Can they? That's one sort of type of concern that the Admiral expressed, but then there's other concerns, which is, well, what about other countries like China and Russia? What if their warning mechanisms are deteriorated by global warming and trigger false alarms? What if we get, rogue incoming missile, bleeps coming up on the defense radar shields of China, Russia, America? The probability is that an accidental nuclear war becomes much more possible. So we have huge problems coming up. The official term in Washington speak apparently is that global warming is a threat multiplier. So you have the standard threats, identified by the official intelligence espionage circles. But then you have this rogue thing, global warming, coming in, which they all agree is a threat multiplier. So conventional threats get even worse. And I found particularly disturbing the Arctic problems that they explored in detail. Okay, so that was the first extraordinary sharing. Now, the follow-up is going to be in, Professor Holdren is already doing research with China, because one of the questions asked was, should America and China cooperate on this? Like, we have more to gain than lose. Well, yes, he already is. Holdren is doing work with the National Academy of Sciences and in China on research into civil uses of clean energy, and they've been sharing. This is a common threat to all humanity, not just and this is it was heartening to see this discussion taking place. Right, so then there was the second session. This was I attended 4 of the 5 sessions. It was a half day. The next one was chaired by Sue Gordon, who's a former long-term serving CIA analyst, gone academic, and a very interesting chap, Dr. Rod Schoonover, who is another academic who's involved in all this research. He's actually a physicist. So he, as a scientist, knows the problems of global warming, and he was telling us what they are. He worked in the CIA for 10 years. He's no longer working there. But he, and because they're not sharing anything classified, this was not a sort of secret meeting. He set up an ecological futures group to try and get scientists of the world to to try and make the case to the military and intelligence circles that this is a serious problem. So he's been acting with his body as a kind of, like a Hermes, like a communication device between the scientists studying the facts of global warming and the threats to the environment, filtering that through to the appropriate authorities in Congress and in other countries around the world. You know, this is a common threat to us all. Then we heard from a John Lombardy, who is another long time serving intelligence officer who worked with the US Southern Command for many years, but has a grasp of the importance of the threat of global warming to American security, but also by implication to global security. One of the themes that kept coming up is this isn't something that can be dealt with in the normal way. Normally, you know, you find out the enemy's weakness and you make it a sort of game, like how can you survive global warming and they'll go down. No, this is not the way to deal with it, and that's what they were all saying. We have to think of this as a shared threat. We have to pool our intelligence resources, nation to nation, and agency to agency within nations. I mean, there's something like 27 separate branches of US intelligence. They're not very good at sharing. We know that in the wake of 9/11, you know, there was no sharing properly. Certainly not in the run-up to it. So that, and one of the most interesting things that was said is that we have to, in a sense, rethink the entire purpose of intelligence. This was said by the third speaker, very, very clever man. I'll come to him in a minute. Yeah, that was really interesting. And I at one point, I mean, we can ask questions in chat, right? When I was hearing this very positive kind of we need to cooperate nation to nation to defeat global warming, I made the point in chat that, as a peace scholar, that actually war, particularly major wars or Gulf wars or, God forbid, a nuclear war, they're the worst disaster that can happen to the environment. You know, and the combined role of the military around the planet with all its tanks, ships, planes, rockets is the single biggest energy user on the planet. They use up more raw materials, and if engaged in actual combat or exercises or, you know, roaming around Salisbury Plain day after day, they're burning up the fossil fuels of the planet. So the single best way to solve global warming is to actually demilitarize the planet. So I made that point. And, you know, we should be talking about the demilitarization of espionage and moving it towards a peace intelligence service. And I actually said, why don't we call what we're doing the creation of a peace intelligence service, of which preventing global warming is just one feature, preventing World War III is another feature, you know, establishing a sort of level playing field for human rights and women's rights and economic rights and social rights is another, and so on. You know, what would a peace intelligence service look like? I asked that question. And Rod actually said, that's quite a good question. You know, these are very clever people, and so they can see the importance of what I was proposing. One thing that I was very interested in is these are extremely clever people, but, you know, and they're using their intelligence now not just for the advancement of America's security, power, you know, all that stuff, because those days are gone. You know, Britain, I mean, is also very clever, but likewise, you can't bomb your way to solve global warming. I mean, all these American and British military people are good at is bombing. We've seen it endlessly in Libya, Iraq, Yemen. You know, the model is World War II bombing. I mean, that's how the West won, well, let's call it the Anglo-American bloc, won World War II, was by bombing. And, you know, Dresden, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Monte Cassino Abbey, you know, that's how we won. Well, I didn't call that winning. I mean, that's just ridiculous. But we can't win the struggle for peace in that way. So we need to totally rethink what intelligence is about. And here for once was the Circle actually saying that. I've been saying this for the last 20 years, like I don't know what. And then there was the third part, which featured an amazing guy called Rolf Mowat Larsen. What a great name, double-barreled Mowat Larsen. Some kind of American Scandinavian guy, who said we need to totally rethink what American intelligence is for, and by extension Chinese, Russian and British and European. He was an expert in WMD, weapons of mass destruction, fighting terrorism. He served in Moscow. He did all the traditional espionage stuff, but he recognises that this is a whole new ball game. And he said one of the problems is that the intelligence services of the world are staffed by the old guard. They're staffed by people who are formed to think in adversarial terms, and who are always thinking of, we can bring that guy down, we can advance us with these dirty photographs, we can blackmail that guy, we can defame those people. That's the old style thinking. And all sides are doing that kind of stuff. What Rolf said is, no, we need to totally think. For that, we need a new kind of intelligence manager or leadership. And we need people that can be creative and imaginative, because these are problems that no intelligence agency in history has ever had to deal with. Each epoch brings up its own problems. When British intelligence had to crack Enigma, they recruited the best brains of Cambridge and Alan Turing and London. I know people whose parents served in the code cracking of the Enigma machine. Brilliant, well done. But what we need is a similar effort now to solve these problems which are facing the entire globe. This isn't a we win, you lose. It's a we win this together. So Rolf was saying, we need people with artistry, because the new kind of intelligence we need is not following the old protocols, the kind of plodders that do everything by the book. No, we need artists of intelligence. We need creative, visionary leadership to solve this serious problem. Well, this is mind-blowing stuff. I've been saying similar stuff as an educator, that our education systems, whether at school or university, the danger of them is that they're going by rote. They're pushing out plodders and people that can tick boxes and answer exam questions. But they actually penalise people that think outside the box and want to be visionary and want to think creatively. I keep hearing horror stories of students writing brilliant essays at A-level or in undergraduate and being marked down. You didn't answer the question in the right way. It's as if there's a whole bunch of robots have taken over education. And the same with intelligence, apparently. So this guy and this conference was saying, hey, we need urgently a whole new type of espionage person who can join up all the dots, see the connections between societal unrest, global warming, energy control, border security, refugees, political veracity, etc., etc. Anyway, it was really interesting, and there was also discussion of the problems we're facing as a planet, the pandemic. One of the people on there, Carol, has been involved in a research report production about heading off the next pandemic. Intelligence agents are beginning to realise this is a huge, it's the worst security lapse in recent history. Why didn't intelligence see this coming? Or did they? Was it just Trump that ignored the warning signs? What about, Johnson and the UK Brexit government? Again, they seem to have totally ignored its threats. One of the problems about global warming or pandemics, and Carol made the point that they may be connected, because it may be that this pandemic has escaped from, this is the official theory, that it escaped from bats in caves in regions that are not normally accessed by humans, but because of global warming they've been accessed, they leaped, and here we are, facing, major catastrophe. And we can expect more. So we're dealing with non-adversarial threats. There's nobody we can blame for this. They're non-linear. They're completely different kind of sui generis threats. There was also discussion that we need a shared lexicon. We need the intelligence agencies, both internally in the country and externally, to cooperate and establish a shared lexicon, because some people don't even agree about what security means or what is intelligence. At this point, some of the people saying in the call, well, maybe we shouldn't even call it intelligence. Because in the traditional sense, it's not. It's something different. And then we came to an extremely interesting talk by Lieutenant General Richard Nugent, who's a British Army general, very traditional, old school, a graduate of the King's College War Studies, as well as Sandhurst and all the rest. I mean, he's a top-star general who's in charge of climate change policy in the MOD. I've not met him, but I know King's College well, and he was put in this role of thinking through on behalf of the MOD what should be the British Army and Navy and Air Force's response to climate change threats. He spoke extremely well, and he said that we need to transform our thinking about what the military is for. Maybe we should retool certain regiments or brigades inside the military so they become environmental first response squads, like would have been needed in New Orleans when the flood broke, and will be needed in future hurricanes and flood scenarios, or forest fires, like in Australia. Is there a unit in the Australian Army to fight these forest fires? What about in Greece? Greece is going to come into the hot season and there'll be fires all over the Peloponnese. There usually are. Well, has the Greek army got training for that? Has it got access to the appropriate equipment? They ought to have, because these problems are not going away, they're getting worse. So, anyway, this chap, Nugent, spoke extremely well. He was the guy that said maybe we shouldn't call it intelligence, maybe we need a sort of cooperative thing, because traditional intelligence is always competitive. It's this army seeks to find out what that army's doing secretly, and then use that information for its own victorious ends. This is different. They couldn't think of a solution, so I put in the chat, I said, why don't we call this a wisdom service? And some of my colleagues and students know I've been using this term for a long time. I always call myself a member of the wisdom service, not the intelligence service. Because intelligence is a misnomer. They're not intelligent, these people. Because that old school paradigm of adversarial thinking is what we have to get away from. We have to get into a holistic view of using wisdom, our highest potential of thinking, for the common benefit of not just our own nation, but our continent, our humanity. Anyway, so who knows? Maybe my suggestions got through to Lieutenant General Richard Nugent. A very clever man, I must say. So, in a nutshell, and then afterwards, after a little gap, we then heard from John Kerry, Senator John Kerry, who is a old school, Democratic politician, been around the world, done lots of diplomatic missions, and it was heartening to hear that he's got the message. And in fact, he's been appointed by Biden to lead on this issue in an inter-agency capacity. He's the kind of lead spokesman from the government. I think he's got a cabinet position. So, good luck to Kerry, and good luck to all these people. It was a brilliant, conference, and I think it gave me hope that maybe humanity is going to wake up in time and start using its resources for good, for peace, for solving global warming. And, I'll know it's happening when each country begins finally to set up a peace intelligence service. There was a lot of talk about whether, America can reach out and find common interests with Russia, with China, with the Gulf for these issues. And there was a feeling, yes, we can. Britain likewise can reach out with its other partners, with Europe and the European Union. I've always said, I think I was one of the few people from Europe attending this call, I've always said the European Union needs to create its own intelligence service. And it should be called the Peace Intelligence Service. You know, the militarisation of the European Union is not an option. There are strong national governments inside the European Union, fine. Let's have a shared, common Peace Intelligence Service whose mission is to support the work of mediation, conflict resolution and peacemaking in all neighbouring territories, like in the whole Mediterranean region, like in the Levant, the Middle East, the Caspian region, Ukraine and so on. It's in the interest of the European Union to have a Peace Intelligence Service. And they ought to get on with it yesterday. After all, they did win the Nobel Prize for Peace. Let them earn it. Right, okay, so that's a summary of what I've been up to, which is so exciting and interesting, and unusual actually, that I thought I'd share it in my weekly broadcast. And I hope you're as excited by this as I am. Obviously there's a long way to go. I think one of the things that struck me is, I thought we were higher up the mountain than this, but apparently not. It's like we have to keep starting off again and again from base camp. I mean, I've been thinking this stuff 20 years ago in my PhD thesis, and it's only now that the intelligence elites of America are actually thinking it. That was why I set up the Global Green University, 20 years ago. And it's only now they're making the connections between, and very grudgingly and in small scale, between peace and environmental problem management. Anyway, better late than never, eh? Then I want to mention about Brexit, my initial reason for these weekly broadcasts and fasts. To me, it is the antithesis of everything that intelligence seminar was talking about. International collaboration, trust building, common responses to common problems like global warming. I mean, that's what the European Union is doing. And a group of maverick right-wing oligarchs and their techno-geeks have forced the public into thinking it's a good idea to break all that cooperation and go back to sort of Fortress Britain as if they're turning the clock back to Dunkirk, I mean, I've never in my life known such a brainwashing of the people. It really is a lesson in hubris. But anyway, I want to share the fact that this week a group called Another Europe is Possible, which is a think tank, has produced a very interesting report edited by Luke Cooper of the LSE. I did part of my degree at the LSE. My daughters used to go to nursery there. I know it well. And Luke is helping with the LSE's sort of Institute of Ideas. And they produced this report, which has been endorsed by a number of eminent thinkers, including Professor Mary Kaldor, who's an old friend of mine. We were involved with the Helsinki Citizens Initiative in the lead up to the 1990 Treaty of Paris. She was involved with END, with Edward Thompson, and, the peace movement of the day. I was running Philosophers for Peace. She was a very, very competent networker for peace. Her father was a famous economist, of course, and she's endorsed it. She's professor at the LSE. And also we have Nadia Whittam, who's a Labour MP in Nottingham, a city I know and love well, where I used to teach. And we have Caroline Lucas also endorsing this report. So this is an important report to take note of. What they're arguing is that the current situation with Boris Johnson's botched Brexit deal, so-called deal, is a catastrophe.